Hello, I would like to welcome everyone to this Borlaug Dialogue side event titled Small-Scale Irrigation, Resilience and Nutrition, Can We Have It All? My name is Claudia Ringler. I am with the International Food Policy Research Institute and I'm moderating this session today. We just concluded an opening poll where we asked you where you think the key impact areas of small-scale irrigation are, and the results are, you can see them now projected on the screen. Okay, so I guess most of you believe that small-scale irrigation is essential for food production in the dry season, followed by increased climate resilience and improved nutrition, less so increased empowerment for women, and maybe some contribution to increased water pollution. So we'll see which of your opinions will get strengthened as part of this session today, and maybe you'll change some of your other opinions. So thanks so much for being with us today. Why are we doing this session? You know, as you can see, there are so many needs where irrigation might be needed. We have a growing climate crisis, deepening food insecurity, and the additional impacts from COVID-19. It's clear that sustainable solutions are needed that reach resource-poor smallholder farmers. And we can take the poll off. Small-scale irrigation, which is increasingly implemented by smallholder farmers or groups of farmers themselves, can play an important role in addressing these challenges. But small-scale irrigation needs to be placed in a larger construct of water nutrition linkages, ranging from water needed to maintain our ecosystems, water for domestic supply, growing water scarcity, and changing diets. Stineke Oenema, the coordinator of the United Nations System Standing Committee on Nutrition, who joins us today from Europe, will tell us how this all fits together in a short introductory presentation to the session. While Stineke opens her presentation, please add questions you might have to Stineke or our panelists into the question box. We are collecting them and will answer them in the second half of the session. Feel free to add your name and also to whom you are asking the questions. Stineke, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claudia. I assume you can all see my screen now. So if so, I'm very happy. And if not, please give me a signal. So the question I'm going to address here, small-scale irrigation, resilience and nutrition, can we have it all? Spoiler alert, yes, we can. Let me first give you a very short background about what is UNSCN, so you know where I'm coming from. In one sentence, the UN Standing Committee on Nutrition works towards policy coherence across and among all UN agencies. And it works towards consistent delivery of that coherent policy on the ground at country level. So the malnutrition challenge. I assume we have a bit of a water public, but at least in the World Food Prize audience, I assume I should not be needing to repeat all the daunting figures we have regarding malnutrition. In general, we can say 1 out of 3 persons in this world suffers from one or several forms of malnutrition. 1 out of 3. We have several billions of people who do not have access, who do not have enough money to pay for a sustainable diet. If we would include sustainability criteria, then even more people would not have access to such a diet. Diet-related chronic diseases are among the leading causes of death worldwide, so we have to do something about malnutrition. Another element related to nutrition, but that's also valid for water, is about inequity. There is a bit of progress in some forms of malnutrition, specifically stunting among children, but that progress is uneven between countries and among population groups, gender and ethnic groups. We see multiple causes of malnutrition, the daily living conditions, obviously, including water and sanitation and hygiene. Inequity, I mentioned that, but of course also the underlying causes, political, economic, environmental, and cultural characteristics are all important elements that can and contribute to malnutrition, as well as the underlying norms, values, and policies. So I already said that inequity also comes through for water, but let me now go into the linkages between water and food security and nutrition. This figure comes from a report, a high-level panel of experts, a report that is connected to the Committee on World Food Security. So what you basically see here, that on the one hand, on the left hand, you see water resources, and on the right hand, you see the elements of food security. And those elements, availability, access, stability, and utilization, are basically very well connected and are the same for water and food security and nutrition. And then when you look at the linkages through drinking water, food preparation, food processing, food production, you can see they can sometimes go bi-directional. So they can go from water to nutrition and from nutrition back to water. And that's exactly what we need to take into account. We have to take into account those elements for water. If we don't take into account water when we address nutrition, we run the risk that we jeopardize water targets, but also the other way around. So we really have to understand the linkages to be able to avert the risks and also build on the synergies. When we speak about water and nutrition linkages, I just quickly need to mention that agriculture is in fact the biggest user of fresh water. So that's an important element, and of course also for food and nutrition. Basically, it affects nutrition and food security in three ways: production for own consumption, through income and price effects, and also as an entry point for enhancing women's empowerment and improving nutrition knowledge and norms. So what do we need to do? We need to ensure nutrition among growing water stress, competition, demand for water, but also pollution. And that's in a context of climate change. We see, as I mentioned, that there is a significant association between household and water insecurity. We also see there's a lot of competition for water between household use, but also and ecosystems, among others, by the way. There's many more forms of competition. And then again, adding climate change, disturbing water-related ecosystems and food production. And then the water quality itself is an element as well. So what can we do about this increasing competition? First of all, we need to increase the nutrition sensitivity of agriculture water management. So what we can do is plan irrigated food production for improved dietary diversity, crop nutrients, and the utilization of production. We also need to ensure that whatever additional income people would get from irrigated and rain-fed production is directed at improved nutrition. And of course, also link irrigation with water and sanitation and hygiene investments for synergistic nutrition outcomes. So these three elements are essential if we want to increase the nutrition sensitivity of agricultural water management. Then another thing we can do to help solve the water and nutrition challenges is to ensure the environmental sustainability of diets. We see that dietary patterns are changing, and that has its implications for water and the use of water. People change their dietary habits, eat more or less meat, eat more or less highly or less highly processed foods, or packaging of food. That all matters. At the same time, we see that despite that food availability has increased, still about 1/3 of all food is wasted. And that means that also water to produce that food is wasted. Another thing that what we need to know a little bit more about, so far, we have limited knowledge on water use for food processing and preparation. We know a bit, but we do not know everything. So let's improve that knowledge to ensure the environmental sustainability of diets. And to do that, one of the tools we have is food-based dietary guidelines that include sustainability criteria and as such support environmental sustainability of diets. Finally, I mentioned inequalities and equities already several times, and we have to address these. We know we have a right to adequate food, we have the right to water, and all these human rights, also beyond water and food, are interrelated. One cannot be addressed without the others, and we have to address them in order to be able to address inequalities in these water and nutrition linkages. Zooming in on those inequalities, gender dimension are of specific importance, looking at specific needs of women, but also the role they play in society. And for example, looking at what happens when you start irrigating a plot of land. Do women still have the same access? Or if income changes, do women still have access to that income? All these elements need to be taken into account. Again, another focus that's extremely important. Let's focus in this work on small-scale producers. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to address these inequities and ensure the right to adequate food and water. So summarizing, develop nutrition-sensitive water management, support sustainable healthy diets, and address inequities in order to reach the entire 2030 agenda. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stineke, for providing this great overview on water nutrition linkages. Let's follow this up by hearing from various actors linked to small-scale irrigation. We will first hear from Nicole Lefore, the director of the Irrigation Innovation Laboratory for Small-Scale Irrigation at the Borlaug Institute for International Agriculture at Texas A&M University, who joins us from the US West Coast. Nicole, please describe to us what the Innovation Laboratory for Small-Scale Irrigation is doing to better understand the impact of small-scale irrigation for both resilience and nutrition. Nicole, please.
Thank you, Claudia. So I would like to first acknowledge the support we received from USAID and the Bureau for Humanitarian Affairs under the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Small-Scale Irrigation. As an innovation lab, we seek to increase understanding, but in order to strengthen the ag water investments of development partners, to have a higher impact on nutritional security and to strengthen resilience, particularly of marginal populations. In our work, we take a market systems approach, but this is nested within a food systems approach. And we are analyzing the role of irrigation to strengthen certain value chains, especially those that improve dietary diversity for producers and consumers both. Farmers are considered investors, as are the private companies that supply irrigation inputs, as are the produce off-takers. And we partner with all of these actors in our research. All farmers are net buyers of food. That means they don't only rely on their own production. This means that not only irrigators benefit when vegetables are irrigated, but also those that can find the cheaper, nutrient-dense foods in the local market. Researchers used to focus on more crop per drop, but increasingly we think in terms of more nutritious foods or more nutrition per drop. The aim really is to use the scarce water and land resources available to farmers for the greatest nutritional benefit. And our research has found multiple ways that that happens. Our innovation lab across many partners has worked on the multiple pathways between household level small-scale irrigation, sometimes called farmer-led irrigation, and nutrition. And the main message is that there's a strong linkage between increased household income from irrigation and the purchase of nutritious foods. This analysis and the key findings have been supported through modeling of farming and water and natural resource systems. Another perspective we apply is that of resilience, particularly resilience capacities. Irrigators are better able to stabilize their production and income, and therefore nutrition. They show higher capacity to absorb shocks and to adapt to changing climate. we find that small-scale irrigators have higher capacities to manage extreme weather shocks, such as longer-term droughts, for example, El Niño events. And importantly, we also find capacity to adapt to shorter-term weather stresses, such as increasingly common dry spells. And women play a central role in both nutritional security and resilience. Women are at the interface between productive uses of water for food production, for example, and domestic uses of water, also known as wash. So we also look at the intersection of the multiple uses of water and how those together impact nutrition. There are both trade-offs and synergies. Irrigation can contribute to improved access to domestic water, but only if this is made intentional, sometimes by the household and sometimes by development interventions and investments. As an example, our study in Ethiopia showed that those that draw irrigation water from surface sources had the worst wash outcomes, while those using groundwater for both irrigation and domestic sources at the household did much better. And we also see that farmers often prefer irrigation technologies and water sources that can be used for those multiple purposes. Overall, for water management to have a truly transformative effect, we will need to empower women through access to information and resources and a stronger voice in water governance. And with that, back to you, Claudia.
Okay, before we move on to our next panelist, could you maybe just give us a very quick specific example where the Innovation Lab is working on in the field? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Claudia. I can illustrate this through a case study in Ethiopia. One of the value chains or crops that we're looking at is irrigated fodder. And we're doing this with the International Livestock Research Institute and the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems at the University of Florida. In this case, we see a stronger influence of consumption for irrigated fodder, both by livestock and by people, compared to some of the other vegetable crops that we research. And we find that fodder producers that use the fodder produced under irrigation for local cattle breeds get an increased milk production. And that enables those families to have an increased and more reliable access to animal-based food sources, particularly milk. With the producers that have crossbred cattle, we see a more significant increase in milk production compared to those with local breeds. And in those cases, the families or households often sell the milk for increased income, and then through that they can purchase other foods, oftentimes animal-based food sources. And finally, the other pathway is that some households sell all the fodder that they produce as a cash crop. And they're doing this in growing markets for livestock feed in Ethiopia. And women have a strong role in these markets, so we're also looking at how this affects women's empowerment. So this provides a good example of the multiple pathways between an irrigated crop and nutrition. Going forward, we're also looking at how climate variability and the irrigated fodder value chain intersect, particularly as climate change puts even more pressure on animal feed resources. With that, over to you, Claudia.
Okay, thanks. Great example. Traditionally we were not thinking of irrigating fodder, right? It's more vegetables, but fodder, another source to better nutrient-dense foods. So let's move over to Beatrice Egulu. She's a policy officer at the Africa Union Commission in Addis Ababa. And I'd like to hear, and I hope, and I think our audience all would like to know, what is the Africa Union Commission doing to strengthen small-scale irrigation in Africa? Beatrice, over to you, please.
As Claudia has mentioned, I'm Beatrice Egulu, and I work for the African Union Commission. First of all, I would like to talk about the African Commission and the way we do our things. The African Union Commission serves as the Secretariat of the African Union to support the realization of the AU's agenda on promoting Africa's growth and economic development. So it's a body of 55 member states that make up the continent of Africa. I'm talking about irrigation because Agenda 2063 in aspiration number 1, it talks of sustainable development and inclusive growth. And this small-scale irrigation, as you've heard from the 2 previous speakers, it's kind of inclusive. It's affordable by the women, it's affordable by the youth, so it's inclusive. And on sustainable development, it also considers the issues of climate change the first speaker alluded to. So in Agenda 2063, we stress food and nutrition security and water security, and definitely enhancing water productivity. We don't necessarily speak to irrigation and promote it in a single way, but we are aware of the competing demands that households have on water, water for energy, water for irrigation, water for hygiene. So we promote it in that aspect, and it is expounded in Malabo Declaration Commitments number 3 on ending hunger, and the commitment number 6 on enhancing resilience of livelihoods and production systems. In that, for that matter, the African Union Commission spearheaded the development of a framework for irrigation development. I was talking about the 4 broad development pathways under our framework, which is agricultural water management under rain-fed farming, farmer-led irrigation, which includes the small-scale irrigation that we are talking about today, scheme development and modernization, and wastewater recovery and reuse. So, how are we supporting the efforts to scale up small-scale irrigation and also scale it out for resilience and nutrition? As I had mentioned, the rationale for small-scale irrigation is that evidence has revealed, or the lessons learned by the implementers, revealed that adoption of irrigation and other agriculture water management practices have significant positive wealth creating and food security impacts on households, and as well as a positive developmental impact on the general economy. Small-scale irrigation also has higher economic returns than large-scale irrigation because this is affordable by a large population, including the vulnerable groups, the youth, the women, and the likely returns on investment in small-scale irrigation across Africa are much higher than those in large-scale development. Another rationale for supporting small-scale irrigation, it is because it has greater resource potential for viable expansion. It has been estimated that in Africa, small-scale development can likely increase on 70 to 80% in the near future. So, on realizing that, what is African Union Commission trying to do? We are trying to coordinate policy formulation. The time we developed the framework, issues of COVID and hygiene had not set in, and we realized that competing for water, for hygiene, and also for irrigation was going to stay for a long time. So we are trying to reach out to the group that works on water sanitation and hygiene. Instead of separating our framework from the other group, we are talking to the African Council of Ministers to ensure that when we are implementing the framework, we work together because they're in the process of developing a master plan on WASH. So we want to discuss with them how can we add in issues of irrigation and nutrition in that master plan. We are also creating awareness about the framework in general, but also small-scale irrigation. And on the 15th of October, we are going to have a high-level seminar, including all the partners, and we have ministers, we have commissioners. So we want them to know about the framework, but also to know how to support small. We are also mobilizing resources for the implementation of the framework, but also more particularly support women to continue with the work they have started on small-scale irrigation. Another thing we are doing is capacity building for member states, and that's why we also have that awareness creation seminar webinar on 15th of October. We have to build the capacity on how to implement the framework, but also on how to scale out small-scale irrigation. As I mentioned, small scale, we talked about strategic partnerships and strategic dialogue. As I'm responsible for the African Seed and Biotechnology Program, I'm reaching out to the person responsible for the implementation of the framework so that when irrigation is done, it's not done only on horticultural crops, roses for sale, but also on staple crops that are being scaled up in the biofortification initiative, where maize, where cassava, where other crops are being biofortified so that the nutrition outcomes are larger. So we shall be working together on that front. And maybe some of you are aware that the African Union Commission is undergoing reform to enhance effective coordination mechanisms when we are implementing. That means that the development agents, the regional economic communities, and other partners that will be involved in promoting the rollout of the framework will also be coordinated at a higher level. Thank you, Claudia, back to you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Beatrice. Really excellent to learn that the Africa Union Commission, the irrigation framework, is reaching out to the WASH planning efforts because of COVID-19 to ensure that resources are used synergistically and not in competition. That's really excellent news. Let's now quickly move on to India, where we will hear from Mansi Shah, Senior Technical Coordinator at Self-Employed Women's Association, which is the largest women's labor union in India with about 1.5 million members. She will be joined by a farmer, Rekha Ben, who is also an irrigator. And Rekha Ben does not speak English, and Mansi will support and do the translation for Rekha Ben. Mansi and Rekha Ben, over to you, please. Tell us, what SEVA is doing on small-scale irrigation, resilience, nutrition, and how has COVID-19 impacted all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste. Hope you all are doing well. These are such strange times, difficult times, which most of us are facing for the first time in our lives. For a large portion of workforce whom I represent today, survival itself has become a big question. These are the poor self-employed women workers from the informal economy, the members of SEVA. SEVA, as Claudia Ben said, is a national trade union of over 1.5 million poor self-employed women workers from the informal economy spread across 18 states in India. At SEVA, we strongly believe that poverty is the worst form of violence perpetuated with the consent of the society. Therefore, to help its members overcome this poverty, SEVA works towards facilitating full employment and self-reliance to its members through the joint action of union and cooperatives. With more than 54% of our members belonging to agriculture, SEVA has been working relentlessly in the field of agriculture since 1995 to address the burning question of why does the farmer remain hungry. Working with these smallholder farmers have made us realize that while the world over the issues of access to water, energy, finance, and livelihoods are considered individual issues and dealt exclusively, for the poor and small and marginal farmers, especially the women farmers, these issues are not compartmentalized, they are all integrated. It's a nexus. While majority of villages in India are now electrified, the supply of electricity is highly unaffordable and very irregular with frequent extensive power cuts. This absence of electricity translates into difficulty in lighting and accessing water for drinking as well as irrigation. Difficulty in accessing water for drinking and irrigation means a woman has to walk long distances to fetch water, thus less time to earn a livelihood, and use expensive fossil-based fuels like diesel to operate irrigation pumps. The combined effect of this translates into significantly less time and resources available with the women to earn a livelihood. A need assessment study conducted by SEVA revealed that women were spending over 40% of their time and up to 25% of their incomes on accessing energy, mainly for irrigation, pumping, especially pumping, and running small tools. When women have less time to work, it impacts the income of the family. Women have a natural tendency of putting their family first. As the family's income shrinks, it impacts their daily needs like food, nutrition, and clothing. With less money to spend, food supply diminishes. And as the women gives priority to the male members and children of the family, often there is hardly any nutritious diet left for the women, thus affecting their health. This is the example of the nexus of women, water, energy, and food. Lack of access to water and energy also brings in other allied problems such as reduction in effective time available for livelihood and welfare, reduction in child welfare, deterioration of overall health standards, and also living standards. And to address these complex intertwined issues, there is a need for a holistic and integrated approach. So how do we address this nexus? How do we address this integrated issues of women and small scale irrigation? And therefore, to address this nexus of women, water, work, food, and energy, SEVA launched its integrated energy initiative, Haryali, that focuses in facilitating affordable access to clean, green energy solutions, thus strengthening the lives and livelihoods of poor women workers. One of the important focus of Haryali was to circumvent the high irrigational expenses and enable round the year access to irrigation for small farmers by facilitating affordable access to clean green solar pumps for irrigation. And Haryali enabled this by providing solar pumps through an innovating financing mechanism, thereby enabling the farmers not only to irrigate their own fields but also provide water as a service to the neighboring farmers and thus earn a livelihood. So let us hear first an experience from of this initiative from one of our member, Rekha Ben, a proud owner of the first solar pump under the Haryali initiative. Kamini Ben, can you turn on Rekha Ben's video, please? રેખાબેન બોલો.
નમસ્તે, મારું નામ રેખાબેન મનુભાઈ રાઠોડ, ગામ બોરિયાવી. હું બચત મંડળ અને સૌર પંપની આગેવાન બેન છું.
Namaste, I am Rekha Ben Rathod. I am from Boriavi village and I work at SEVA as an organizer for SEVA savings and credit initiatives as well as for the solar pump initiative.
સેવા સાથે હું 15 વર્ષથી જોડાયેલી છું અને ત્યાં બચત મંડળની પણ આગેવાન બેન એની પણ સોલર પંપની પણ આગેવાન બેન છું.
આગળ બોલો.
જ્યારે મારી પાસે સોલર પંપ નતું ત્યારે આપણે ડીઝલ પંપ વાપરતા હતા, બરાબર? ડીઝલ પંપ વાપરતા હતા ત્યારે આપણે ડીઝલ મોંઘું પડતું હતું, આપણી પાસે પૈસા ના હોય, રોકડ ના હોય એટલે આપણો નિયમિત પાણી ના મળે એટલે આપણો પાક બળી જાય. 2-3 દિવસ સુધી પૈસાનો વ્યવસ્થા કરીએ ત્યાં સુધી તો આપણો પાક બગડી જાય, આપણી બચત થાય નહીં, આવક ન થાય. પછી આપણે જે
2 minutes. હું અનુવાદ કરી લઉં. Rekhaben says that I am a member of SEVA since past 15 years. Before initially we do not have an electricity connection and therefore we used to use diesel generated water pumps for irrigation. It was a very difficult situation because many a times we would not have access to money to purchase diesel fuel for powering the pumps, and therefore we had to wait for for 2 to 3 days to arrange for money to purchase diesel, and in that delay of 2 to 3 days we would not be able to irrigate our fields, and it would impact the health of our crops, significantly reducing our yield. આગળ બોલો રેખાબેન.
જ્યારે આપણે ડીઝલ પંપ હતો ત્યારે ડીઝલ પંપનો અવાજ વધારે આવે, ડીઝલ લાવવાના પૈસા ના હોય, પછી આપણા બાળકો ભણી ના શકે સારી રીતે, ધુમાડો પણ વધારે થાય અને કોઈ ભયથી ચાલુ કરી શકાય નહીં, કોઈ બેનથી ચાલુ કરી શકાય નહીં, ભય હોય ત્યારે જ આપણે ડીઝલ પંપ ચાલુ કરી શકાય.
Some more challenges on using the diesel pump was that it makes a lot of noise. So it's a big noise pollution, and it also generates a lot of smoke. And since the pump is located very near to our home, it was very hazardous for our health, and my children were not even able to study properly. And another one drawback of having a diesel pump is that it is very difficult to start a diesel pump. Only men can start it. It's very strenuous, and so whenever I had to irrigate my field, I had to rely on the men in the family to turn on the diesel pump. Sometimes I had to wake them up early in the morning, and the men would get angry on me and even hit me because I had to wake them up. આગળ બોલો.
જ્યારે આપણે સેવા સાથે જોડાયા, સેવાની મદદથી લોનથી આપણને સોલર પંપ મળ્યો. સોલર પંપ મળ્યા પછી આપણે પાણી નિયમિત મળે, આપણો પાક સારો થાય, આપણી બચત સારી થાય, આપણા બાળકો સારા ભણે, આપણે ભેંસો એકને બદલે 2 ને 3 રાખીએ, પછી આપણે વાતાવરણમાં સુધારો થાય, અને આપણો સોલર પંપ આપણો પિયાર થયા પછી પણ આપણે બીજાને પાણી આપીને તેનો વધારો કરી શકીએ.
When I learned about the Haryali initiative by SEVA, I immediately requested that I want to purchase a solar pump. After I getting the solar pump, I realized that there were so many benefits of having the solar pump. It's so easy to operate. I just push a button and it starts on my own. I can save a lot of money in diesel. I don't have to wait to purchase diesel, so I can irrigate my field whenever the plants need water, and therefore my yield has increased. The noise and the smoke, noise pollution and the smoke has reduced, and I am even able to sell the water to the neighboring farmers, thereby increasing my income.
જ્યારે આપણે ડીઝલ પંપ હતો ત્યારે ભેંસ પણ વધારે રાખી નથી શકાતી, આપણી પાસે ટાઈમ ના રહે, પાણીની મુશ્કેલી હોય. અત્યારે તો આપણી પાસે પાણી છે અને અત્યારે જ્યારે સોલર પંપ આવવાથી આપણા જીવનમાં સુધારો થયો છે, આપણે જે બચત નથી થતી એ થાય છે, અને આપણા જીવનમાં પણ સારું એ થાય છે.
Okay. She says that another allied benefit of buying a diesel pump, a solar pump, is that at the time because of the savings from the solar pump as well as easy access to water, I am now able to have more I am now able to rear more cattle, and therefore my income from animal husbandry has also increased. I am now able to regularly save, and now that savings which I am able to generate from my because of buying the solar pump, those help me sustain during this current crisis, and therefore I am very happy to have purchased the diesel pump. Thank you, Rekha Ben. Namaste.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just so thank you, Rekha Ben. So as mentioned by Rekha Ben, access to I'll just take 2 more minutes, Claudia Ben. So as mentioned by Rekha Ben, access to solar pump for irrigation has led to some very interesting and encouraging outcomes like ease of irrigation, safety, savings in cost of irrigation per crop, increase in cultivated area, increase in cropping intensity, progressive introduction to new crops, easy access to water for drinking, for animal husbandry, sanitation, and thus leading to improved health and nutrition. However, it is also a known fact that half knowledge is very, very dangerous. Similarly, putting technology like solar pump in the hands of grassroots women without educating them in the prudent management of water and money may lead to climate risks like extreme depletion of groundwater or indulgence in wasteful expenses. Therefore, SEVA also started focusing on promoting efficient and appropriate irrigation techniques and technologies like drip irrigation, sensor-based irrigation, etc., along with with the solar pumps. And we also started promoting, we also started encouraging our members to save more from the savings from the solar pump. So the success of SEVA's Haryali initiative has also shown us that poor do not need charity. Awareness about modern technologies and innovative enabling financial instrument is what these small farmers need to turn their farms into an enterprise, thus making agriculture sustainable and profitable. We at SEVA call this innovative financing mechanism the Women's Livelihood Fund, a fund that is a mix of blended finance, that is a mix of equity, debt, soft loans, patient capital, a fund with longer term moratorium, and most importantly, a fund that builds the resilience of these small agri entrepreneurs to sustain the economic slowdowns like the current COVID crisis. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you both to Mansi and to Rekaben for this very interesting and in-depth case study on the move from diesel to solar, and also I think the importance of having supportive local organizations to actually make these things happen. I'd like to bring everyone now back on video, please. We are in the question and answer session. For the audience, please feel free to send us additional questions also for the latest case studies that you have heard. But we'll get started. We have a series of questions starting with our first speaker. We have a question from Valerie Rowe Davis from CRS. She would like to know about more about the irrigated fodder example. Did it increase consumption of milk from own production? Or do we know what the income from the sale of irrigated fodder was used? Any research on this topic she would be interested in. We also have another question from Marike de Graaf, program advisor for FNS with the Netherlands agency. So she's involved in PPPs on FNS. Unfortunately, I don't know what FNS is. Maybe food nutrition security under the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So yeah, she would like to know what are the minimum investments and what are the minimum natural resources required for small-scale irrigation. That might be a question for both Nicole and Mansi, because you both mentioned about specific irrigation examples. And then there is another question from the Borlaug Institute at Texas A&M, again, on the impact of small-scale irrigation on women. And that also, I guess, goes back to our first poll, to our starting poll, where there was a big question if irrigation actually can or cannot empower women. I think we've heard a very strong positive story from SEVA and maybe a little bit more mixed insights so far from sub-Saharan Africa, but I think also some empowering stories, for example, from irrigated fodder. The last question goes to Stineke at the Standing Committee on Nutrition. So Stineke is the only nutritionist on this panel, and so I think you've told us how that nutritionists have to work with irrigators, but what kind of partnerships can make a difference here, Stineke, please? So maybe Nicole, can you start, and then we move to Mansi and then to Stineke.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the irrigated fodder study, we do have with ILRI as a partner, and also with IFPRI, we have collected data on changes in household income. The amount of change in income depends on the pathway. So if it is providing that fodder to own cattle versus selling it on the market, and then how that shift in income is used. But what we do hear from farmers directly and from the case studies is that there is an increase in those households of animal source foods. So yes, in the case of particularly the local breed of cows, and then to a certain extent the crossbreed cows, we do know that some of that income increase is being spent, some of the increased milk production is being used by the household, and then additional animal-based foods are being purchased with the income. And we do have some papers coming out on that, and we have some policy briefs that we could share with you. If you want to get in touch with me directly, that would be great. I do think that Mansi is a good person to respond on the cost related to the minimum requirements for small scale or household level irrigation. I will just start by saying we've done numerous cost benefit assessments in several countries that, assuming that farmers can get access to that equipment and assuming it's on the right type of business model, so on asset financing, consumer financing, but as well as business models for rentals. About 25% of farmers in some of the countries we work already rent from other farmers or from small business service providers. So there are various models from, asset-based or direct purchase of anything from small manual pumps to solar pumps, but also business models that enable farmers to irrigate without having to purchase themselves. So there is a range, but what we do know is that nearly all the cost benefit assessments that have been done across countries and over the past few years suggest a high profitability insofar as the value chain of the crop being irrigated is a high value crop. But I will hand over to Mansi to continue answering that question.
Yeah, before Mansi answers, there was another question came in specifically for her by Durga Acharya from Save the Children, Child Poverty Reduction Advisor. Durga is that. It's his background. So he would like to know, can women or smallholder farmers really, afford a solar pump? And what was he would like to hear what innovative financing you described. Thank you, Mansi.
So sure, thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Nicole. Yeah, Nicole, you laid out a very good point about the analysis that you have done with a lot of small farmers, and the same thing when I mentioned that we have done the energy auditing and budgeting, we also did a lot of assessment of the affordability of the solar pumps for the small farmers, and we realized that the current with the current financing mechanisms available, it is very difficult for the small farmers to upfront afford or purchase a solar pump, and that is specifically why SEVA launched its innovative financing mechanism. Under this, we laid out three different models. The first model is loans provided by SEVA's the Haryali initiative. The second one is the solar. It's like a collectivizing model, wherein we bring in about 5 to 6 neighboring small farmers to collectively purchase form a water cooperative and collectively purchase a solar pump. The third model was a deferred credit model, and also a model something similar to rent to own model has been also tried. So we have introduced several different kind of models. The biggest challenge in all of just one more point. In addition to these, the government of India has also recently launched the Kusum Yojana, wherein the small farmers get a lot of subsidies on purchasing the solar pump and the rooftop solar, which can be used for irrigation. However, the biggest challenge which is the women are facing, especially the small farmers are facing in access to such clean energy solutions, is the initial amount for the down payment. And this is where the financing mechanism that I said, the Women's Livelihood Fund, which would come in and which would help the women purchase the solar pumps with zero down payment. And we have a whole paper on this, and if anyone is interested, they can write to me directly and I can share the paper with you.
Okay, great. So it is possible, but it is challenging, and obviously some source of water also has to be found. Yeah, great. So now to Stineke. So from a nutrition community perspective, what partnerships are needed, not only to ensure that women and all smallholder farmers can access water for productive uses, but also that this supports nutrition. Stineke, please.
Yes, thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much. I can be very brief, basically. Yes, of course, we need water and nutrition partnerships, but that's very broad. I think what nutritionists need to do in order to really work together with, let's call them water people, is to sit together, analyze the situation together, and plan together, either policies, programs, projects, whatever. But then if you do that together, you have an opportunity as nutritionists that you integrate or include very concrete nutrition objectives in the policies, the programs, or the projects. If you do not integrate these specific nutrition objectives, it won't happen. Nutrition will not improve automatically after you have after you start irrigating or after you do certain agriculture. You need to plan carefully for nutrition in order for nutrition diets first to improve and dietary situations and nutritional situations to improve. And while doing so, so on the one hand, I say, yes, nutritionists need to be there. So I put them on the forefront. But then also let's take a step back as nutritionists. As a nutritionist, I say nutrition is too important to leave it to nutritionists alone. So when sitting together, I think nutritionists also need to be modest. We have the so-called direct nutrition interventions that have a proven positive impact on nutrition, which is very, very good. But that's also why I said, let's carefully analyze the situation together, because you may be able to improve nutrition as well by the so-called indirect nutrition intervention. So through agriculture, through better irrigation, through nutrition sensitive irrigation or water management. And that is exactly what we need to do if you want to improve nutrition at the scale that is needed nowadays, with 1 out of 3 people being malnourished at a time. Let me also, so apart from the water nutrition partnerships, let me mention one more important partnership. We've been discussing investments. And I heard one of my colleague panelists mentioning something about return on investment. Let's involve, as policymakers, now I'm speaking if we would be doing policies, let's involve ministries of finance. Improving nutrition gives us a return on investments of 1 out of 16. In general, it can be a little bit less, can be a little bit more. So it is interesting for the Minister of Finance to start investing in nutrition, be it through irrigation or other, or directly through nutrition or other types of interventions. And one more call to sit together with that Minister of Finance is that research has shown that if we invest with public investment, with public money, it will also trigger private money to be invested in that good cause. So let's also not forget the finance sector to sit together with. Thank you, Claudia. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. We are almost reaching our end, so I would like Beatrice both to give us a short closing statement, and all of you, please prepare a very, a 1 minute or 30-second statement of what are the next step to strengthen small-scale irrigations, resilience, nutrition, and also women's empowerment impacts during COVID. So one short statement, what are the next steps? And Beatrice, please also tell us what the Africa Union Commission is doing. I mean, this WASH framework for irrigation combo, I mean, sounds extremely important. And I'll try to share the link for the October 15th event with everyone. But any final statement on that, please, and then we'll move to the other panelists for final statement. Thank you.
As you are all aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that the moral option is to have it all, to access water for equally competing and emerging priorities like hygiene, resilience, and nutrition, and especially for the missed cropping calendars, because people are locked in and locked down, and nothing worked so much in terms of agriculture. So irrigation is kind of imperative, but you also know that irrigation comes with the use of, when fertilizers are used, the other side, the other negative side is that there will be pollution. So that's why equally important, we need to strategic dialogue, and we need strategic partnerships at various levels of the public and private. It doesn't mean only the Dangotes, it also means the farmers, multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary, interministerial, and also intergenerational, the youth and the old people also talking together. We need a total package. And that's why I also talked about strengthening the nexus between the framework of on irrigation and the African Food and Biotechnology Program, and also WASH that is being spearheaded by the African ministers of water.
Okay, great. Okay, good. I mean, those are great partnerships, and it's great that African Union Commission is pushing those forward and that you are keeping an eye on it. That's excellent. So let's now move to Mansi Shah and Rekaben, a final message. Now, what do we need to do to strengthen these desired outcomes, please?
What I feel is needed to be done is from our experience again, we very firmly believe that technology, when given in the hands of the poor, they know exactly how to use it to generate and strengthen their livelihoods. The current pandemic especially has shown us that distant and virtual working and globalization is one important way, but it is not the only way. There was a world before the airplanes and before the 80-story office buildings. We must try localization, that is local production, local management, and local consumption. This will lead to building an economy of nurturance which would strengthen the livelihoods of women, especially the rural women farmers, thereby increasing their access to nutrition and hence health. It will lead to a dignified and equitable future, better future for all. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Nicole, what is the Innovation Lab doing going forward?
Thanks, Claudia. So if we're thinking in terms of COVID-19 specifically and resilience, and we are looking at water scarce areas, we're looking more at the intersection between irrigation and WASH, which has already been mentioned. But I think this is where we see that strong stabilizing influence on nutrition and health, because it enables WASH. So it enables households for domestic water uses, both for consumption and sanitation. So we see that stronger impact on health by looking at that intersection between irrigation and WASH. And this is not, of course, our exclusive focus, but in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, this is one of the areas we're looking at. And another is just in terms of for those families or households that have missed the primary rainy season because of restrictions during under COVID-19, having access to irrigation during the dry season may enable them to, prevent the backsliding that may have occurred during the rainy season when they couldn't access markets, so that they can pick up on some of that production and stabilize their income during the dry season.
Okay, yeah, no, I think that sounds, that's a great idea, and that's one of those stabilizing roles of irrigation. Stineke, last word, and then we'll have to close down because we're out of time. Stineke, please.
Yeah, thank you, Claudia, again. We spoke about water, we spoke about nutrition, we spoke about food, adequate food. Those are human rights. Right to water, right to adequate food. We spoke about inequalities, inequities. Let's address those. Let's respect, protect, and promote those human rights in order to achieve the entire 2030 agenda. We cannot do without, and I believe water and nutrition together, the synergies, can do that, can really make a very big contribution to that. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I would like to close today's event. Thanks to all of the participants. We have taped the session, and we also will make available the slides separately. Thanks again for listening. There is a lot of material out there, but we need to learn more. We need more studies, and as we have heard, a lot more to be done everywhere in the world. Thanks so much for joining us today. Goodbye.
Namaste.
Thank you. Bye-bye.